Well, thank you so much, Mel, for joining me today. Super excited to chat about your interesting journey before Bruvi, before becoming a coffee entrepreneur. Let's say, I guess talk about your career path. Like, how does one work at Tower Records, then a lawyer in Singapore, to becoming an entrepreneur in the coffee world? Like, talk about that journey before Bruvi.
Everything happens because you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. I know we can think about being planful about things, but most of the stuff that happens to us is probably opportunistic. I set my path when I was a kid on actually trying to become a professional soccer player, but I was so bad at that I then decided that I needed to get into a band, and I was equally bad at playing the keyboard. So, I had no choice, but I had to go to law school. It was my third option. And, it just went that way. My parents wouldn't pay for anything unless I actually became a lawyer. So, but I knew right away, as soon as I started practicing after years and years of studying, that, being a lawyer is just a horrible fit for my personality. And
Sure.
I was more interested in the entrepreneurial side and trying to get clients. And, I was a bit of a risk taker, which is kind of the antithesis of being a lawyer. And then, I guess, a client had multiple operating businesses, and I was doing their contracts for, opening a Tower Record store, and, they were opening a coffee business. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really good. So I ended up leaving law and working in the executive field, building and developing the first Tower Records store in Malaysia at the time, because I am Singaporean and I was in Singapore. And then they happened to want to do this coffee business, which was called the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. And we were the first franchisee in Malaysia and Singapore. So I'm like, listen, I'm already living in Malaysia. Let me try and open these coffee stores. And this was even before Starbucks opened over there. So, we're talking about, 1997, 98. And then I guess the rest is history, because, music retailing went into the abyss with digital. And, coffee experiences, especially because they provide the social interaction, became, all the rage. And, we started opening coffee stores in Malaysia, in Singapore, and then the group was like, you know what, the growth in the US and the franchisor wasn't really stepping up to the plate. So why don't we try and see if we can buy them out? Because in 2 years, we had something like 27 coffee stores in Southeast Asia, and, they had not grown their US footprint.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over there in 1999, which is over here, the US, and we worked on buying the parent company. That happened. And, next thing we know, after a long story, too long to talk about, we were owners of the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, which had 30 stores in the US and 30 stores about in Singapore and Malaysia. And, the first day on the job, all the executives left, and, I ended up staying here. And it was a situation of, okay, what do you want to do? And so I ended up being in operations. And I got involved in operating the coffee business and opening coffee stores in the US, setting up the franchise system, and expanding the brand. And in the US, for those of you who are familiar with the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, we ended up growing the business from what was effectively 60 stores to, over 1,500 stores worldwide, with about 35 different countries. And it became this, enormous business. And we had a nice differentiation platform, and, we were doing pretty well. And, in 2013, we sold to private equity, and later on we sold to a strategic. And in 2019, I completely exited the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf business, no longer on the board. I was the CEO from 2008 to 2014. Through that transition of growth and through selling the business to private equity. And then I stayed on as a board member, and, so I've been in coffee, I would say, for 20-something years, 27 years now. I lose track of time. I don't want to suggest what my age is. But it just happens. You're in the right place. You have the right opportunity. And I grew to love the coffee industry. I love the people. I love the connection to the product. And it so happened that through those years, the specialty coffee rage hit, what we call third wave coffee here. People were able to differentiate quality from non-quality coffee. and it became part of the social fabric of life. Very much so, and we now consume coffee immensely. 65% of every American adult drinks coffee every day, and the average is about 2 to 3 cups a day as well. So the amount of coffee consumption is just absolutely enormous, and I was living that entire journey, and watched how first wave coffee, which is the Folgers and the Nescafes of this world, turned into second wave, which is the Starbucks and the Peets, turned into third wave, which is the specialty coffee growth.
Yeah.
And I can continue, but I will pause there to see if you have another question.
Listen, I think it's so interesting that you saw the maturation of the entire industry, really, from as being maybe a side thing for a culture, right? Maybe to it is culture. I think, like you said, 65%. I mean, we're talking mass numbers at scale here. What was it like to see it become? I guess there's always this sort of difficulty when a thing becomes like a commodity. It's really great for economies at scale, but there are things that happen at the farmer level, right? And I think when we talk about coffee, scale, there's these enormous businesses built off of it. It's like, how can we appreciate the farmer at the lowest level? Like, how have you seen sort of the maturation of the farming sector and sort of the farmer at the level as the sector has grown? How would you say the development on the ground has really matured in a positive way or a negative way, just from your perspective? I'd love to hear it.
I would say extremely positive, because in the 60s and 70s, when first wave was there, coffee was in fact considered a commodity. You couldn't differentiate coffee in terms of quality grades, because the sophistication of the consumer was just not there. There was no demand for higher grades of coffee. So as a commodity, I feel like it is probably disadvantageous to farmers and producers. As coffee began to transition from a commodity to a flavor and something that can be differentiated in taste and quality, you are able to allocate a premium price for better quality. And as a result of a premium price, those farmers producing better coffee would get paid more. So there was this incentive for farmers to, raise the quality and to really start differentiating their product by grades, because they would get paid more for it. And I think that's, that was happening in the sort of 90s and, the noughties. And then what we have today is, consumers demanding or requesting fair trade, capital small f and T. They want to know that where they buy their coffee from have sustainable practices. They want to understand that, they treat their workers well and they give back to their communities. So as a result of this demand side, the producers have been more encouraged to demonstrate and to be certified and to show the buyers that, they practice good labor laws, they don't have child labor, they have water conservation, and they are generally contributing back to the communities, because consumers of specialty coffee and third wave coffee demand this. They want to know from their coffee house that I'm buying coffee from places that treat farmers well. So it's always, the long, complicated arm of capitalism that really makes the most change and the most effective change with the least amount of waste. And because consumers are willing to pay a premium for fair trade coffee, it trickles down to the farmers. Now, there are still obviously instances where this is not practiced completely, or some farms get away with just not practicing these good practices. But I think the most effective thing that we can do as consumers when we think about making a difference to farmers is, are we paying a right price for the coffee?
Yeah.
And in many instances, retailers are buying coffee below the price of production even. And that's the worst thing you can do for farmers, because they just don't have the ability to develop and sustain and to produce quality. So for the most part, when you're buying specialty coffee from specialty retailers, that they're paying a fair price for it. And that's, I think, a big contribution that we can make. It's the easiest, most effective way that we can contribute to good farming practices.
To double click really quick on that, before we get into Bruvi, like has the certifications, and we'll just take the broader one of fair trade, there's direct trade, there's rainforest, there's all these sort of certifications now in the industry, and you've been as a consumer and as a buyer, right, as sort of a franchisee and an operator and an owner, you've seen it from all different sides. Has that been a positive for the sector to have these certifications, even from a farmer level, but also from a buyer, right, perspective? Has it been good overall for the sector, sort of, in your opinion?
I mean, yes. It's imperfect, but it raises the bar, because what these certification agencies have done is they've created awareness and a platform, and it's a sort of low-hanging, easy way for consumers to feel, if you like, guilt-free about their purchases, and for producers to achieve a certain standard. So it's definitely raised the bar. It's definitely a good thing. However, people in the know can do even better. So, for instance, at Bruvi, we don't adopt a certification because we buy directly from the plantation.
Gotcha.
So we would rather give the farmers direct contribution rather than going through an agency where, let's say half of it is kept for admin and marketing. And so I'd rather give, our farmers 10 cents a pound in their hand for them to do whatever they want to do with it, rather than give a certification agency 10 cents, knowing that only maybe 5 cents makes it to the farmer. But I don't want to sort of talk down on these things, because, it's all it's all a process, and the awareness leads to better systems and better ways to do it. So just because a coffee doesn't have, certified fair trade or certified Rainforest Alliance, it doesn't mean it's not practicing some sort of verification program. And I think consumers are becoming more and more aware, and they ask these questions and they want to know. And, as far as brands are concerned, we don't, most of the brands that I deal with, and, of course, Bruvi, we definitely have checklists, and we definitely give direct contributions back to the farm, mainly because it's the right thing to do and a good thing to do. But, if ever there's short supply, if there are issues, these guys are going to give us the best quality coffee when we have been paying them more for it,
right,
when we have been contributing to it. So we want to be a nice buyer, because when times are tough, we know we'll get the good product. And when times are not tough, we know that we'll get the good product. So again, capitalism ensures that it's a win-win for everyone to do the right thing.
Great segue into Bruvi, because like we've mentioned, you've been on all sides of the industry. What made you want to get into the hardware of it? Because this is, in any sector, hardware is really difficult. A lot of different variables, a lot of different supply chains. I guess talk us through what was the catalyst for looking at the space and saying, hey, we want to make a sort of hardware consumer product, for the coffee industry. Just talk about that.
I would say selected amnesia, because as a startup founder or co-founder in my case, you've got to be a little crazy to even do a startup, right? Because but you have selected amnesia. You forgot how difficult business can be, and you forgot about all the opposing forces that you have to deal with internally, externally, from a policy standpoint, from a funding standpoint. And then to double down and do a hardware startup, we must be absolutely nuts, because, hardware is hard. So, but, you have a sense of optimism, and you want to make a difference in the world. You want to create something better, and you forget about all those difficulties as you dive into the, excitement of being an entrepreneur. But there are a few things I would say to that, other than we're crazy. But we're not really in the hardware business. We're a coffee company. We're not an appliance company. The hardware is just the vehicle to be able to conveniently, affordably enjoy high quality coffee at home. And so, we always think of Bruvi as a coffee company first and foremost. And at the end of the day, we're selling coffee. It just so happens to come out of a machine, but for the most part, we're in the coffee business. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is, don't use the word hardware. We use the word consumer tech, which is
way better.
Sexy, way better, especially for investors, because they're like, oh, you're a hardware business. We're not going to, well, no, we're in the consumer tech. Oh, all right, let me write you the check.
Yeah, so California of you, so Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's, the right, the words you choose from a marketing standpoint is very important. So, that's something to bear in mind. But the true story is when I was the CEO at Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf in 2012, we launched a single serve system because it was the sort of heyday of Keurig, and they were growing
Sure.
double digits, and they had proved to the world by that time that people want convenience at home through these capsules. They had the tough job in 2002, 3, 4, and 5 to establish the category in the US. And they established it. And so we were like, well, we should have our Coffee Bean coffee in a single serve system also, because they're the only game in town. So we licensed European technology, and we bought machines, we put them in our stores, we developed our branded capsules. And going through that process, I learned a lot about single serve. And I learned for the most part, that Americans don't drink espresso. They really like filter or brewed coffee, what we call low pressure coffee. And they don't think that, a 2-ounce little small concentrated shot of espresso gives them value like a 12-ounce filter brewed coffee does. It just is the way we consume coffee in the US compared to Europe. I also learned that having to go through retailers like Bed Bath & Beyond is extremely difficult. And there was no such thing as direct to consumer at the time. We had to go and distribute either through our own store network, or you have to do deals with, the Bed Bath & Beyonds, the Macy's, the Targets, and so on. They control the customers. They take between a 35 and 55% margin. They don't pay you very well. And distributing your product through that network is just very difficult. And then also what we discovered was, because there is only really one single serve player in the US, which is Keurig, you don't really need to innovate taste and quality that much. The downside of being a monopoly is that, people will still buy, and, innovation is sort of hampered. And really, there have been so many advances in single serve technology and the ability to improve quality and to improve taste and to improve the convenience experience that just wasn't coming into the market. So, as a single serve executive for many, many years, I always thought that as soon as, my non-compete ends and I'm able to get back into coffee, I really wanted to do single serve right and innovate and really deliver to the American consumer a superior experience where taste and quality can be combined together, where you don't have to compromise quality for convenience. And that's the sort of main impetus in terms of why I decided, where do I want to go back into the coffee industry? Do I want to open more stores and have a brand?
Right.
No. And I'll just give you another bit of sort of like sense in terms of the coffee market. If you think about 10 cups of coffee that are consumed, before the pandemic, 8 cups of coffee are consumed every day at home.
Wow.
And the balance 2 cups are consumed at the office or, in a coffee store. And, everyone knows about coffee places where you go to and drive to, but the majority of Americans, 8 out of 10 of them, are consuming coffee at home. Now, after the pandemic, that became 8.7.
Wow.
And then after the pandemic, people started to say, well, why am I consuming such terrible coffee at home? My expectations for my cup of coffee at home should be as easy to make and as good as what I would get if I stood in line in a drive-through
and the cost too.
Spent $4 for a coffee. Yeah. So the entire dynamic of thinking about where you get your cup of coffee and your expectations of getting a really good cup of coffee at home has really transformed itself in the last few years. Today, the American consumers expect to have a convenient, affordable, and delicious cup of coffee at home. Now, in our opinion, the existing single-serve providers like Keurig, who have a 91% market share, and Nespresso, who have like a 7 or 8% market share, do not deliver that experience. You get convenience, you get affordability, you don't get quality and taste. I can ask you this, and many of your listeners would probably agree. When was the last time you had a really delicious cup of coffee that was made out of a capsule?
Maybe never.
Maybe never. So you get, and I'll put this in perspective, 21 billion capsules sold a year in the US. That's the size of the capsule single-serve market. 21 billion. Yet these 21 billion consumers are making horrible compromises to the quality of the taste and the experience they get generally, but they still buy because it is cheap and it is convenient, and single serve is a very effective way of consuming coffee at home. But imagine all those guys could get much tastier, much better quality coffee, but there isn't a provider that does that. So that's where we came in, because we saw the opportunity in the market. There is only one real viable alternative, which is, Keurig and maybe Nespresso, because, espresso consumption is growing in US households. So we said we want to play in that area at home where most people are drinking coffee, and we want to innovate, transform, if you like, the single serve market, because there has been no innovation in taste and quality. They're stuck with a technology system that was developed in the 90s. So we developed Bruvi from scratch, new patents, new technologies, bringing to bear all these amazing improvements in heating technology, energy efficiency, degradability of capsules, and we basically innovated every aspect of the experience, and we have provided the market with the now you can have both value proposition, better convenience, and significantly better taste. And when we talk about taste, we talk about removing the bitterness from the coffee experience and getting as good, or dare I say better, taste at home in a convenient single serve platform than you would if you got it in a coffee shop.
When you talk about innovation in the space, what does that look like? You mentioned the technology part. You mentioned the B-Pod part, which is one of the things that really, when I looked at the company, really stuck out to me was, how do you invest in these innovation areas that, on the back end have a real impact and a real, scale after you're done, right? End of life for all these products nowadays, I think, is important to me. I think it's starting to be more important to, more conscious consumers out there. Is like, yeah, once I'm done consuming whatever I'm consuming, then what happens to it, right? Because then there's a whole nother animal when we dig deep into that side.
So at Bruvi, we innovated in all areas, from design to taste to extraction. But one area that was extremely important to us was, how do we innovate in terms of eco-consciousness? The fact that we're delivering this product in a plastic capsule. And when we think about the negative effects of plastic, it really is the end of life, the disposal of plastic, that is the problem. Plastic per se is not a problem. Plastic per se, I have to say, is actually a wonderful material, because
pretty amazing. It's actually one of the greatest. It's greatest of all time, really. It's great. The problem is it's the most sustainable product ever. It just lasts forever.
It's horrible when it comes to end of life, but when it comes to the value proposition of plastic, it is lightweight. It's easy and more energy efficient to transport. It provides safety in terms of health protections, because it reduces food waste tremendously. It does so many amazing things, but damn, it's hard to get rid of, and it's hard to. So what's been happening in plastic end of life? I think we've suffered from two issues. One, everyone's going down the sort of zero waste, the perfect solution for end of life and for behaving in an eco. We're like, there's, if we wait for zero waste or the perfect solution, it's not going to happen, at least in our lifetimes. So we're from the school of, we'd love millions of people to practice eco responsibility imperfectly, rather than 10 people to practice it perfectly. So we had to overcome that reality in our own heads. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is, for whatever reason, end of life has always been equated to recyclability as being the option, or the only option, or compostability being the only option. So when you think about the EPA guidelines in terms of, dealing with waste, the first thing is, can we reduce our usage? Well, we're not here to tell people to drink less coffee. And we believe consumption is only going to grow. The other thing is, can we reuse materials? And then the third factor is, can we compost it? And if we can't compost it, can we recycle it? And only then, can we go to waste to energy? And then fourthly, in landfills. So this EPA hierarchy of waste disposal is a one-size-fits-all. And it works really well for cardboard boxes, maybe for glass. But in our opinion, the problem with this one-size-fits-all is that it doesn't take into fact or consideration that not all materials are created equally. Cardboard boxes are a fantastic material to follow that EPA hierarchy. Plastic is a horrible material to recycle, or compost. Yet everyone is like, recycle your plastic, recycle. But there are reasons why in the US, only 4% of plastic ever gets recycled because it is not a one size fits all and it is not a good material to recycle. So when we looked at Bruvi and how we could innovate, everyone's going down the recycling route, and we're like, well, look at these, look at these recycling facilities. It's all mechanically done. Small little capsules are horrible to recycle because they go through the meshes and they end up in the landfill anyway. And what are we expecting consumers to do? Open this capsule and wash it and clean it and separate the grinds and then keep it in a little bag and recycle it, only for it to end up in the trash anyway. And then you've got so many problems with plastic recycling because, it amounts to downcycling. Every time you recycle plastic anyway, you're creating a product with less stringent technical and aesthetic qualities. So really only 1% of plastic that is recycled twice, because it just gets worse and worse, unlike aluminum where you can recycle it 1,000 times and you don't lose. So there are 100 reasons.
So even the rPET, RPET.
Yeah, the PET.
It kind of has it, even when you recycle it and it gets reused, it still has an end of life function because it cannot be continually recycled over and over and over and over again.
Correct. It's called downcycling because it just never, you always have more and more contamination. So you can't do it twice. For every reason in the world, other than PET, which is water bottles, and HDP, which is maybe your shampoo bottles and stuff like that, plastic recycling is a bad idea in Bruvi's humble opinion. I feel very responsible in being careful about what I say. We should always look to innovate and find alternatives to plastic, but today there is just not one that can be used by big CPG companies. Where possible and where convenient, we should be recycling plastic like water bottles, but little small capsules, in our opinion, would be disingenuous to say they're recyclable. First of all, they're not made from PET or HDP. They're made from PP number 5, which is polypropylene. Mm-hmm. And not every community has access to recycling facilities that in fact recycle polypropylene. Yep. But even if they do, they're less than 2 inches in diameter and it's impractical. So, I just don't think recycling little plastic capsules is practical or a genuine and honest approach. And we've seen that people who say they are recyclable have already been fined and their lawsuits and it's just not, in our opinion, the way to go. So we had to think at Bruvi, well, what is the way to go? Because we like plastic for its food preservation qualities, for its efficiency, its carbon efficiency to produce, but its end of life is problematic. So we researched, we dug deep into all the new technologies out there, and we came across a technology that was fantastic. And we're presenting this technology as an alternative way to dispose of plastics. Alternative to recycling. We've infused the plastic capsule with an FDA-safe enzyme. What the enzyme does to the plastic is that it breaks the long-chain polymers so that when it ends up in a landfill, only in an anaerobic environment, i.e. when the landfill is covered, not when it's exposed, it will start to degrade. And it degrades in around 5 years. So every landfill in the US is covered. There are methane capture systems once it's covered. Yep. And, almost half or, just less than half of the landfills in the US actually have landfill gas to energy conversion systems that clean the methane gas that's collected and repurposes it into renewable energy. So
I'm trying to interview somebody in this space because to me, this is something that's not talked about. I would love to because I don't think it's talked about enough that landfills can actually be incredibly beneficial to what we're trying to accomplish.
You think of landfills as, pictures of the 80s, which are overflowing and, barges, falling into the ocean. That is not what a modern landfill is.
They're kind of nice.
They have golf courses on top of it. They have solar panels on top of it.
It's crazy.
They're all lined with anti-leachate materials. They all have gas collection systems in them. But there's a lot of misinformation and confusion. So I'll give you an example. We would not advocate throwing organic waste into the trash, because what happens with organic waste is that it ends up in the landfill and it starts to ferment very quickly before the landfill is covered. So what happens with organic waste is that you get this fermentation, and the methane gas that's produced is lost to the atmosphere and contributes to greenhouse gases. But with our solution, with our plastic solution, it will only start to degrade when the landfill is actually covered and when you have a higher propensity of methane being able to be collected. So, it's a very, so people will say, well, landfills contribute to methane. Yes, they do when it's organic waste. Absolutely. But our plastics that have been treated start to degrade after most of the collections can be effective. So again, you have very differences. The differences are very nuanced, but make a huge difference. So what we do at Bruvi is we've taken a problem, i.e. plastic waste, and we've turned it without changing human behavior, without having additional infrastructure,
huge
composting infrastructure, more garbage trucks coming to pick up, compostable stuff. And we have made the problem, i.e. plastic waste, into renewable energy. Now, what's wrong with that solution? And that, for what I'm really excited about is, why are we just doing this? Why is Bruvi, little startup company that's, trying its best to make a difference and improve, the consumer experience at home and, trying to make a difference in the world? Why can't we be an example to other companies who produce yogurt cups, who produce salad dressing cups, who make apple sauces? I don't know. The list goes on. Those things are not per se recyclable, no matter what people will say.
No matter what symbol on the back.
No matter what it says on the back. And California is actually, thank goodness, coming up with a regulation that's really going to shake up the industry in January next year. You can't have the chasing arrow symbols on product that basically where communities don't have 60% of communities or more don't have access to recycling. So why don't we have an alternative way to dispose of plastic where all you need to do is take the product and throw it in your trash? Nothing different. Now, we're already doing that. It doesn't end up in, just think about a capsule that you make at home. You have to make it at home. It's not litter. It goes into the trash because it's at home. It's not like a candy bar wrapper or something like that where you could end up in a pot, where it leaves the value stream and ends up in the ocean. Capsules don't do that because they're made at home. They're thrown in the trash and it ends up with the same infrastructure in a landfill where it contributes to renewable energy. I want to know why.
It's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing because everyone, there's so many lobbies and so many interest groups that are going to say all sorts of things about it. And that's the beauty of, life, that everyone, the plastic recycling associations and the existing companies that say that their little capsules are recyclable, they're all going to find and give excuses and say reasons why. And my answer to all those guys is, you're right. This isn't a perfect solution because, as it so happens, only 98.7% of our capsule is actually going to degrade. There's a small element that isn't. You're right. There are some landfills that, potentially don't have waste to energy conversions. So there are also problems. But I can tell you this. There are many, many, many less issues in throwing your capsule in the trash and then ending up in the landfill for it to degrade and for it to be turned into renewable energy than there are throwing your little capsule in the recycling bin. Because I would bet that actually what we do when we do that is we contaminate the recycling stream.
And that's why a lot of stuff doesn't get recycled, is because of the contamination.
Worse, it actually affects decent product that should be recycled because it contaminates that. It makes it more inefficient. And it ends up in the landfill anyway. I want to know what the hell is happening out there to make this solution not more widely used. And why is only Bruvi and a couple of other small producers, taking the difficult task of having to educate consumers, having to come on, podcasts and talk shows and having to explain to the general consumer that recycling little small capsules that have color additives and God knows what other additives that use polypropylene is not a good idea. There are other better ideas. Help me out here, Grant.
What's the you mentioned the California legislation. Are you able to touch on that? Like what does that entail?
It's a labeling regulation about the inability for brands to use recycling arrows on the resin codes. So when you see a piece of plastic, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. people mistake those things as, oh, this can be recycled.
Right.
Those are just resin codes. Those just say what the plastic is made of. One being PET, two being HDPE, five being polypropylene, and so on. But because they're chasing arrows on those codes, and because of the general misinformation, people are like, oh, I see like chasing arrows and this is number 5. I'm going to throw it in my recycling bin. No, 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 no. Anything other than PET1, anything other than resin code 1 and 2 is actually not universally recyclable. 5 potentially can be, but not all Americans have access to those facilities that do. And I think California is just saying no more chasing arrows and no more confusion when it comes to this. And I think that's going to make a big difference. And we actually agree with these things. And when California adopts these policies, it becomes very difficult for consumers not to make it applicable for America at large, because we have online and direct consumer marketing now, and there's going to be some changes in the way, and I hope people are just getting a lot more informed about the good, bad, and ugly of recycling. Recycling is fabulous, but not all materials make for good recycling solutions.
Yep. But even more so, they can actually do more in a landfill, which is, I think, not sort of the thing being talked about. Where
so I'll throw you stuff your way, but just so you know, the EPA has an organization called LMOP, and this organization supports and provides information about the landfill arena, if you like, in the US, and how different companies can actually use landfill waste to energy programs. Again, this is not about burning plastics and getting rid of. This is not waste to energy. This is landfill gas to energy, which is very different. Without diving into the detail,
sure,
it's very difficult to change, and it has to be capitalism, and it has to be the consumers that actually make change, just like it did in us buying better for the world coffee. But 1,700 or 500 or so active municipal landfills in the US, 80% of them are either owned or controlled by 3 companies.
Wow.
If these guys were committed to putting landfill gas to energy conversions, we would solve all our problems. 3 companies. Wow. Now, why are they not incentivized? They're not incentivized because they make a ton of money just dumping waste into landfills. They don't need to take the extra step from an incentive standpoint. They're, all good people and everyone wants to do best for the world, but there's no grants or extra incentive for that.
There's not a subsidy to help them invest in doing that.
I mean, what are you going to do? Go to your politician and say, let's dump more plastic in landfills? The politician is going to say, no, the L word is a bad word and the R word, recycling, is a good word, and I'm not going to advocate for better landfills. I'm going to advocate for more recycling because I want to be voted in.
Mel, what we need is, we said hardware earlier. No, it's consumer tech. We need another word for landfill. What can we come up with that replaces the word?
Find one. If you got one, send it my way.
Field tech.
Field tech. I mean, these things are just
garbage tech, waste tech, maybe waste tech.
But all we need to do is incentivize these 3 large operators to invest in landfill waste to energy projects, and we will have created from landfill being a methane producing entity, we would have turned that into a natural renewable resource.
Yep. It's such a game changer.
It's a game changer. It is a no-brainer. And I wish I was more politically inclined, because I would stand up there in front of the legislation. I'm not worried about being reelected or anything like that. But the little thing that Bruvi can do, and the little things you guys as consumers can do, if and when you buy a Bruvi machine, first of all, you get the best coffee you've ever had in the most convenient way, but you will advocate for an alternative way to dispose of plastics. And we can be living, breathing examples of doing things imperfectly, but much better than the status quo. And we'll move along that continuum until we get to zero waste.
Yep, exactly. Thank you so much for taking the time. This has been amazing, absolutely amazing. And the only reason I know this well, some of this is because we're like renovating this old house that we bought, and we've been going to the landfill with stuff from, packing up in the house, going to landfill. And I'm like, this place is like amazingly clean. And my father-in-law is like, yeah, you see these sort of poles that are sticking out of the ground. He's like, that's methane gas being produced from the garbage.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is amazing.
It's amazing.
Like,
do me a favor, get somebody from, waste management, get somebody from, because they will tell you this, but they're making so much money just picking up garbage and dumping it. They don't need to do anything else.
Exactly. So they probably wouldn't come on and talk about it.
But there are, this is incredible. This is great.
Yeah.
If we just put a little bit of subsidies their way and make it equally as profitable for them to invest in these systems, great. The other person you should get on is somebody from LMOP, LMOP. Go to the EPA website. Everything I'm telling you is government endorsed. The government is trying to push the value and the merits of landfill gas to energy projects. It's not the commercial sector trying to do this, but of course, it's very unpopular to go on air and to tell somebody don't recycle your plastic, or to say landfills are actually wonderful opportunities for us to create renewable energy. Very unpopular. No one's going to listen to you. They might throw you off your own show, Grant. Then you're going to be in trouble.
Well, I'm independent, so they can't do that part. But
the long arm of
yeah, that's true. That's true. But it's not so much don't recycle your plastic. It could be you can recycle all plastic into one.
Recycle PET, recycle HDPE.
The 1 and 2. That's what we need people to understand.
Yeah.
That should be the only two symbols on products.
Correct. And or even PET and HDPE when it's less than 2 inches in diameter, don't recycle it. Small little
because it'll give more value. It'll give more value to the earth if it ends up in a landfill that produces
provided they're infused with enzyme. And it is every plastic manufacturer can do this, but all the guys that are making plastic, they don't dare do this, because they'll piss off the recycling thing. And, people will say, what are you talking about? Throwing stuff in the landfill, letting it degrade? That will create methane. Yes, it will if it's food. Yes, it will if it's organic. But will it really when the landfill is topped and sealed? And when we have landfill, and when it only degrades when it's in an anaerobic environment? It's a great solution. We have it. We're ready. It's the path of least resistance.